Hi everyone, welcome. We'll just give it a couple of seconds. People are entering the webinar. Okay, excellent. Right, we might kick off then. We're also recording this webinar so you can share with your colleagues, but it's great to see such a great attendance, and I can see the numbers are rising as well in the participants list. So my name is Laura, I'm the Director of the Irish Council for International Students, and we're joined today by a fantastic panel of speakers who are going to talk to you about St. Brigid's Day. And we're joined by Liz Keogh from the Department of Foreign Affairs as well. Who are responsible for running all of this, and we're delighted to work with them today to organise it. I want to thank my colleague Tiana as well for organising this event. So I guess before we kick off, just briefly, I mean, you're going to hear more about St. Brigid's from the experts now, but we all have a bank holiday next Monday, which we're very grateful to St. Brigid for. And I think it's great that Ireland has recognised you know, Brigid on kind of almost the same par now as St. Patrick. She's gone quite under recognized in Ireland for many years. And of course, St. Brigid's Day marks the start of spring as well in Ireland. So in bulk, it would have been it's a Gaelic pagan tradition, the start of the springtime. So it's great to see that the lengthening evenings as well, starting this time of year. So very important time in the calendar. So look, we have plenty of time for Q&A as well during the session. And we have the chat function as well if people want to use that. I'll be keeping an eye on that as well. So without further ado, I'd like to pass you over to Elizabeth Keogh from the Department of Foreign Affairs, just to introduce herself. So welcome, Liz.
Thank you, Laura, and good morning and welcome to you all. So thank you to Laura and all the ICOS team for your work on the Ireland Fellows Programme, and in particular to Tiana for organising today's event. And thank you and welcome also to all the speakers. I'm really looking forward to your insights and reflections. So this is a wonderful opportunity to celebrate St. Brigid's Day together. Our embassies around the world are marking the day by celebrating the achievements and creativity of women through a wide range of events in partnership with local communities. And it's a wealth of creativity and achievements to celebrate on the Ireland Fellows Programme amongst both alumni and current fellows. And that gives us another reason to get together and celebrate those achievements here. So for those of you working on your master's programs at the moment, I wish you the best as you continue with your studies. And once again, thank you, and I'll pass you back to Laura. Thanks.
Thanks a million, Liz. So we're going to introduce our first speaker, who is Alba van der Heide. So Alba is a library assistant in the National Folklore Collection in University College Dublin, and she was awarded an MA in Irish Folklore and Ethnology and a BA in Modern Irish and French from UCD as well. Her research focused on seals in Irish folk tradition, and she has worked on various research projects regarding seal lore, oral history of the Irish Revolutionary, as well as many other topics. So she has a presentation for us today, and there'll be a little time for questions afterwards. So you're very welcome, Alba. I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, Laura. And I'd love to, just as I'm sharing my screen here, I'd love to thank all the organisers for organising this lovely event and for inviting me to be part of it. I'm always excited. I'm very fond of St. Brigid, so I'm always excited to talk about her a little bit. You know, it's always the 2 seconds where you have to start off the presentation. And I do apologise for this blinding light here beside me. Hopefully you'll be looking at the presentation rather than looking at me. There we go. So thank you to all the organisers again. And I thought I would just start by explaining a little bit of background to the National Folklore Collection, just so you know where all this information that I'm sharing is coming from. The So the National Public Collection, we are an archive here in University College Dublin. The majority of our collections were amassed by our predecessors, predominantly the Irish Folklore Commission, which was founded in 1935, and the Department of Irish Folklore, which took over from them then in 1970. So the reason that the Irish Folklore Commission was founded was because there was concern that the oral tradition of Ireland would be in decline, would fade. And so their goal was to collect and preserve information while they still had access to it. There was a strong kind of feeling that that traditional life was going to change, what with the radio and the television and everything changing in Ireland around that time. So what the Irish Folklore Commission proceeded to do was employ full-time folklore collectors who would go into their local communities and their local areas and sit with people and record them on various topics. It could be from the very practical to how roofs were thatched, what were the fishing traditions, how to take care of animals, different very practical elements of life in that way. How were houses built, what were traditional houses like, to the oral literature. So were there long folk tales told in your community? Were there legends? Were there any folk songs to be heard, etc., things like that. And then, of course, all of the life in between. So how we celebrate different festivals, how we celebrate different parts of the life cycle, what is our place in the community, in our family, things like this. So many different topics that they could collect on, and they proceeded to do so. And the way they did this was originally with kind of a very old recording device called the Ediphone, in which they would transcribe out this material that becomes part of our manuscript collection here in the archive. And then later, as sound recording became a little bit more possible, they made actual recordings that would have gone into our sound archive. And as I have this lovely picture here, and it will probably come up again, I will also mention another manuscript collection that we have, which is called the Schools Collection. It took place only for about a year, from 1937, the school year of 1937 to 1938, in which the school children of Ireland basically became collectors, and rather than as a particular part of their homework, they would go and speak to their grandparents and parents about some of the topics that I mentioned earlier, and again write it as part of their homework. And this then came to the Irish Folklore Commission. It became part of their collections as well. And they have lovely written pieces, and all of this collection is available. I might put it in the chat later on the website duchas.ie. So there's plenty more to be found about St. Brigid and about Irish folklore in general on that website. They also have lovely kind of gems that you can find in there sometimes, like this lovely image here. Not all children were illustrating their work, but this is a lovely illustration of a statue of St. Brigid from the Irish folklore, or from the Schools Collection. But without further ado, we'll get into it. So what do we mean when we talk about St. Brigid? So the kind of earliest reference to her in written material is from about 600 AD, and it lets us know that she was from Fahart in County Louth, and that she was described as another Mary, which is an interesting thing that I'll get back to a little bit later. So, and her kind of rise in popularity is probably due to the rise in power that came in Leinster around that time. So at the request of the Church of Kildare, the cleric Cogitosus wrote her hagiography in 650 AD. So it was mainly a compendium of miracles attested to St. Brigid. You may have also heard that there's a goddess of the same name. referred to as Brigid. She was a member of the Tuatha Dé Danann, kind of the mythical race of people in Ireland. And she would have been known for things like poetry and livestock and healing. And while it's generally accepted that some of the attributes of this goddess may have been indeed kind of taken in to the image of Saint Brigid the Saint, when we speak about Irish folk tradition and Irish oral tradition, everybody's referring to Saint Brigid, Brigid the Saint, in this respect. But she's an incredibly beloved saint in Ireland to this day, and she kind of always has been. You can kind of tell from the number of place names, the number of holy wells and different areas that are named, churches that are named Kilbride, Kilbride, many places named for her, and of course a sincere, very strong celebration of her feast as well. But why is she so beloved here in Ireland? One of the reasons, as Laura mentioned earlier, is 1st of February is the beginning of spring. So in Ireland, the kind of the pre-Christian calendar, each of the seasons was kind of ushered in by what's called a quarter day. So Imbolc on the 1st of February brings the beginning of spring. May Day in Bealtaine brings summer. The Harvest Festival, again, traditionally would fall on the 1st of August, but because it's a harvest festival and it's a very busy time for agriculture and things like that, it generally falls around the weekend, very close to the 1st of August, because nobody has time to stop in the middle of your week to stop work. And then, of course, Halloween on the 1st of November brings the winter season. I had a feeling that would happen. So the coming of spring, there's also, particularly because St. Brigid is very much associated with livestock and with cattle in general, she's very important to the coming of spring and the new agricultural season. Weather as well is what signs for different kind of how to predict the weather is very closely watched on St. Brigid's Day, because it can give us an idea of maybe what weather is to come and how the crops might fare in the season or for the entire year. There's also some kind of proverbs that talk a little bit about the lengthening of days and the idea that our days are now going to get brighter and longer from St. Brigid's Day onward. So the first quote I have it here, Gachre la every second day from my day onwards, is what St. Brigid says about her feast day, that every second day would be brighter from her feast day onwards. Now the second line to that is St. Patrick says that every day from his festival onwards, 17th of March, will be brighter and better. But it starts from St. Brigid's Day. And then the second day, on Candlemas Day, throw the candle away. But then again, this will follow up with St. Patrick's Day. On St. Patrick's Day, throw the candle and the candlestick away. So Candlemas, of course, is not the 1st of February. Candlemas is the 2nd of February. It's actually not a feast for St. Brigid. It's a feast of the Virgin Mary, where candles were blessed. But there is a relationship between St. Brigid and Candlemas, and we'll get back to that in a second when we look at a particular story to do with St. Brigid. Another reason for the fact that St. Brigid is so beloved is probably because of her closeness in Irish folk tradition with the Virgin Mary. Now, I noticed earlier in the earliest kind of reference we have to Brigid, she's described as another Mary, and indeed the kind of the nickname Muir in the Weil is still used to describe her to this day. So Muir in the Weil, or Mary of the Irish. So it's quite a strong nickname. But in folk tradition, she's also depicted as quite close to the Virgin Mary, and they appear in different stories together. They have interacted, and they get on quite well. To get back to Candlemas and this relationship between the Virgin Mary and St. Bridget, I thought I would give you this example here. Now, this example is from our main manuscript collection. It was collected in County Galway. It's in Irish, but I'll paraphrase. So the Virgin Mary on her, she's trying to travel with the baby Jesus, and she comes to crossroads in which there's a pattern, a big crowd and celebration, there's dancing happening. And she can't get through the crowd, but Saint Brigid is there with her, and Saint Brigid says, "Don't worry, I will take care of this." And she sees a harrow. I've added this picture of a harrow so you kind of can create this image for yourselves. But a harrow was used to work the land, to kind of prepare for planting. So St. Bridget sees this harrow in the next field, and she plucks out these kind of spikes in the harrow and replaces them with candles and lights all the candles. And then she proceeds to drag this harrow through the crowd, and the crowd kind of follow her, and they are distracted. And the Virgin Mary can then, Our Lady can walk through and walk past and go continue on her journey. Another version of this kind of takes place in church, and because Ali doesn't want the attention, St. Bridget actually wears this kind of contraption of candles to distract attention from the Virgin Mary. And in both stories, the idea is that Our Lady is so grateful to St. Bridget for doing this for her, that she allows St. Bridget's feast to take place on the 1st of February, and then Candlemas, the feast for the Virgin Mary, will take place on the 2nd February. I'm a big fan of the image, the lit candles on the harrow is just great. I've chosen this quite compact story from the school's collection because it kills a few birds with one stone. There's a lot of things going on in the story, and there are a couple of stories that are quite common about St. Bridget. So you'll recognise some of the features in it, I think. There was a king in the Curragh of Kildare long, long ago in the time of St. Bridget. He had 2 horses' ears, and he was very much ashamed of them, that he wore his hair so very long to cover them. Anyone who cut the king's hair had to be put to death for fear the barber would reveal the secret. St. Bridget shaved his hair, and by a miracle, when she had finished, the king put up his hand and found he had 2 ears like every other person. So probably a recognizable story to you. It's well known around the world, but it's maybe particularly well known from Greek mythology. But it's also a very common story in Ireland. The king is called Lowry Lynchuk. And there are some versions that kind of combine it with St. Bridget. So they add St. Bridget into the story and say that St. Bridget was the person that kind of took away his ears. Probably because, again, she's quite associated with livestock. The second half of the story then, a very common, probably the most common story known about St. Bridget. The king was so delighted that he said that he would give Bridget anything that she would ask. She said that all she wanted was as much land as her cloak would cover. She put the cloak on the ground, and it spread and spread until a large part of the plain was covered. Here she founded a church and a convent, and thousands used to come for alms, and those who were sick came to be cured. So yes, this is probably the most well-known story about St. Bridget. Because this is kind of preceded by the Lowry Lynchuk story, the king with ass's ears, this king seems quite pleased to give her the land, but often the king is not very pleased about having to share, to give his land for a convent. And his way of getting around it is to say, I'll only give you what the amount of land that your cloak covers. And then the miracle occurs when St. Bridget spreads her cloak and gets as much land as she needs. But moving swiftly on from some stories about St. Bridget, there's much more. She's sometimes depicted with St. Patrick, and kind of stories about converting pagans and things like this. Many, many different stories about St. Bridget, but we will move on to her feast and how we celebrate her feast. So when we talk about quarter days, usually the celebrations of the feast don't begin on the festival themselves on the 1st of February. They usually begin the evening before, which is quite, you know, you might have come across this in terms of Halloween. The beginning of the winter season is the 1st of November, but it begins the evening before on the 31st of October. So the making of crosses is probably the most well-known custom for St. Brigid's Eve. This one, you see the cross marked number 2, this kind of diamond shape, according to Kevin Danner, was kind of the most common version of the cross, but many of you maybe might recognize number 5 down here, the one with 4 arms. It's probably maybe most common today, particularly as it was used as the logo for RTE for quite a long time. And it's also generally, now that children do this practice in school, in primary schools, is usually the shape that's chosen. The crosses were often made from rushes, but sometimes from straw. I think a couple of these examples you can see in the fact there is made from straw. There could be varying amounts of ceremony with the making of crosses. So this example here, when gathering the rushes and bringing the rushes into the house, somebody might walk around the house. Often this might be a daughter in the family, a young kind of a representation of St. Brigid, would walk around the house maybe 3 times and then knock on the door and say, "Go on your knees and let in Brigid." And then the members of the household might say, "She is welcome." This kind of custom kind of works on the idea that St. Brigid is supposed to travel the country on the evening of her feast, leaving kind of blessings on each house. And this kind of mimics that idea. And you'll see a couple more things that that use that idea that appear in different customs. The custom doesn't always have to be, or the ceremony doesn't always have to be this complicated. It could be just that the cross was made and maybe blessed with some holy water and hung up in the house. It might replace the old cross from last year, might be replaced with this new cross. And you know, with kind of items that are venerated or used in celebration of different things, often it wouldn't be okay to kind of throw it out or throw it in the compost. So usually the idea was that it would be burnt. Burning is kind of the more respectful way to get rid of the old one and bring in the new one. But there are houses in which this wasn't the case at all. They didn't get rid of any crosses, but instead would add another cross each year, particularly in houses in which they were put up into the thatch or the rafters. So then you just kind of collect, you have lots of houses that when you kind of look into the roof much later on, find actually loads of Brigid's crosses in the roof. They were placed in the roof for protection from fire, from storms, and from lightning, and also from illness. So we have one in our archive to help protect the British goods. Just quickly, as I move on from crosses, just quickly so you can kind of see how they're made, how the 4-armed one's made. It starts with one single rush, another one is folded over it, and then another one is folded over that, and you work in this clockwise direction, because many things in folk tradition, it's quite unlucky to go the other way, the anti-clockwise way. So another celebration that you might not be aware of is a procession called that would take the Brigid, or the biddy, which is this effigy basically of the saint. In this picture here, you can see that it's an actual doll, but it would often have been made of straw and kind of created maybe with a stick as the arms and straw as the body, and then dressed maybe in a cloth, sometimes in white, but I've seen other ones in kind of coloured cloth as well. And they would take this kind of effigy from house to house, You can see these kind of young men here, they're wearing straw hats, and they would go around and they would play music, and they would have instruments with them, and they might have a dance. It was quite a lively affair, and they bring a blessing with this effigy of Saint Brigid to the house, and they might receive a little bit of money, but it might have also been kind of sugar or flour or things like that, kind of anything that they could want, maybe some oat cake, something like that. We have young men here, but it wasn't always young men. Sometimes it was young girls, and kind of a more maybe young girls would often go around to the house again with the effigy, would bring a blessing from Saint Brigid into each house, and if they're lucky, they might get a couple of pennies. Again, one of the last things here, the brat breeding. You can see this lady is laying out a red cloth. Red is a particularly useful colour when it comes to kind of protective qualities. But it could also be a ribbon as well, and it was left out on the windowsill or maybe on a bush outside. And again, working on this idea that Saint Brigid would travel through the country and leave blessings. It would be blessed by Saint Brigid as she passed, and then used for different cures throughout the year. So if you had a headache, the ribbon might be tied around the head for a little while, or if a cattle might be having trouble or illnesses or things like that, pain, it might be laid over the back of the animal to help relieve it. Finally, it brings us to our final thing. The celebration generally takes place on the day itself. So rather than the eve of the feast, the day of the feast, people might go and visit a holy well. As I said in the beginning, many holy wells are dedicated to Saint Brigid. Often holy wells are kind of known to have cures for eyes, but other cures as well. They can be known for other cures. And the idea of a kind of short pilgrimage or a visit to the holy well might involve doing what's called rounds, or a particular kind of practice of maybe might involve walking around the wells, saying prayers in a particular place, maybe kneeling on a particular stone, and kind of everybody follows these in kind of veneration of the saint, or in tribute to the saint on her feast day. This lovely image here is an image of the holy well in Liscannor, the well in Liscannor for Saint Brigid. It's quite a popular one as a destination for Saint Brigid's Day. And I'll just read out this piece here. So they perform rounds at the well to Saint Brigid, asking for requests. They think these requests will be granted if a trout appears in the well before they leave, when saying the final prayers. In general, it is quite lucky when you see a fish in a holy well. That's thought to be quite a good omen. There is an old woman there whose name is Mrs. Burke, for years instructing strangers how to say their rounds. For this little help, people are supposed to give her a shilling or so, and she says rounds herself for people who cannot come to the well for 2 shillings. So the well at Liscannor is quite big. There's quite a long enough route to take, but other wells can be small. And as you can see from this picture, it would be common enough to maybe leave different tokens. And you can see the rosary beads hung over some images there, some statues, things like that. It's quite a popular idea for all holy wells, not just for holy wells dedicated to Saint Brigid. But again, it would be popular to visit any Saint Brigid on the 1st of February. So that brings me to a close, and very quick kind of tour there, but around briefly just touching on some different traditions, but I would be very happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Alba. That was fascinating. And I loved all the pictures as well. And the old photographs. It was really, really interesting to look at. We'll all be on the hunt for a well. We'll have to find our nearest well to check it out. Okay, does anyone have any questions? I'm just looking in here. Oh yeah. Okay, so interesting question for you. well, did Saint Bridget and the Virgin Mary ever meet in real life?
No, probably not, because I think the record date, it's something about 500 AD or 540 AD, something like that, is about her death date. I can't remember the exact date. So that's 500 years after the birth of Jesus. So probably not, but it's quite a common thing in Irish folk tradition to have people kind of skip out on their timeline. I think it's one of the maybe my favorite elements in Irish folk tradition. Tends to make saints, but also historical figures and different people like that. They make them very human, so they can interact in the way that maybe we would with our neighbours and with our friends. And so it is quite common. It's common enough for Saint Bridget to interact with Saint Patrick, for Colm Killa, the saints to interact that way. But then also historical figures. Daniel O'Connell, speaks to Saint Patrick at some points. It's even though they're wildly out of place in their timeline, but the folk imagination is really great that way.
Excellent, that's great. I think there might be another question here. Yeah, is Saint Bridget much older than Saint Patrick?
There's not that much in the difference. I suppose the issue then is maybe if people want to consider the image of the goddess, then possibly, but it's very hard to kind of make assumptions on what is a goddess, what is Saint Bridget. That's a little bit of a difficult question, but Saint Bridget and Saint Patrick are not that far apart in their timeline. I'm actually blanking on the dates for Saint Patrick. I used to know them off the top of my head, but no, they're not that far.
Perfect. Okay, I don't think there's any more questions unless anyone has a burning one right now. So we might move on to our next speaker. Oh, hold on, we just have one more, so I think we probably have time. Oh yeah, just people are just thanking you for your great presentation.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ava. That was really fascinating. Okay, so our next speaker is Tracy O'Connor. So we're delighted that Tracy can join us today. So Reverend Tracy O'Connor is a board director of Herstory, co-founder and director of Corporate Wellness Ireland, and an ordained One Spirit interfaith minister. And she has a passion for encouraging more engaging communication practices whilst developing deeper understanding and compassion. So Tracy also initiated the successful campaign to make St. Bridget's Day a national holiday in Ireland. So we're delighted to find out more about St. Bridget from Tracy and about that campaign as well. So you're very welcome. Pass it over to you now.
Thanks so much, Laura. And it's a pleasure to be here with you all. And thanks, Alva, for the fabulous information on the school records. It's really important to have that historical record of, there's so little information, especially on the female deities, I suppose, for want of another word. So whatever we can grasp gives us some sort of reference. And I'm delighted to see the others here as well, who you're going to hear from, making the references between deities in their own culture and their own country. As Alva referenced, there are stories that weave throughout the world that have similar undertones. So thanks so much for inviting me to be here today as a board director of Herstory. And as an interfaith minister myself, I was really guided, and Alva, you were speaking about how people, speak to St. Patrick or St. Bridget, and how is that possible when they're not actually present in the same timeline? And for me, speaking to a St. Bridget or a St. Patrick or any other deity, it's a very personal matter, in fact, that we can drop into that space of just being present with ourselves in a sense of prayer, in whatever way you feel called to do that. We all pray for some guidance. And for me, Brigid really had my back. Like, you know, her cross of protection is on my stole as an interfaith minister, was woven into the back of what I wear in ceremony. And I was really drawn to really feeling into her protection, and that cloak, that magic as well, that has those magical qualities that draw us into a sense of something beyond ourselves. And there's no doubt that she had a huge hand, etheric hand to play in making her day a national holiday. It was really awoken in me around 2018, and I thought there has to be a way. She has to be honoured. And knowing that she's a patron saint of Ireland, alongside St. Patrick and St. Columkill, that nobody knew about this. Why does Patrick get all the glory, you know? So I reached out to a friend of mine who was equally passionate about Brigid, and we met actually at Slane Castle, which was really interesting because Slane is where St. Patrick lit the Paschal fire. So we were nearly coming to the St. Patrick territory to go, how can we initiate a campaign? How can we make this happen? How can we really shine a light on Brigid? And we were aware of Herstory. I was aware of Herstory at the time, and I since became a board director. But Herstory, and I'll share a little with you about Herstory and their campaigns towards the end. But we really felt into reaching out to Melanie, who's the CEO and creative director of Herstory, who basically is on a mission to illuminate female figures in history, to illuminate them, to bring them out of the shadows of history and into the light of her story, so that her story could be told. And Melanie had already created a wonderful movement and following of equally passionate people who agree that there are so many amazing women in history whose stories haven't been told. And it just took off really from there. We gathered a petition and sent it out, and one thing led to another, and it just made so much sense. When we were doing research around why it would make sense, we discovered, well, I'd already discovered that Ireland was actually behind the rest of Europe in terms of the number of public holidays that we actually have, which was really surprising to me because I felt we already had a lot of public holidays. So that made sense. It also made sense, as Alva was talking about, the quarter days. In Celtic tradition, we celebrate every 6 weeks the turning of the light towards another phase of the year. And so between the solstice on the 21st of December, which is also celebrated at the same time as our Christmas, between the solstice and the equinox, which is around the 21st to 23rd of March, meaning equal day, equal light. So the returning of the light from the darkness of winter towards the equinox. It is a really dark time for a lot of people, particularly around January, January Blue Monday, mental health issues, particularly in these times. For me, it was one of the most important reasons for us to bring in an additional holiday, where Brigid is allowing us to celebrate the return of the light and the return of spring, the return of new beginnings, of hope in particular. So in bulk, meaning in the belly, as Alva was referring to. And also, if you haven't seen it, there's a beautiful documentary on RTE, which was aired on the 31st on Brigid's Eve, called Finding Brigid. And it was put together by Siobhan McSweeney, who is the nun in Derry Girls, made famous by Derry Girls. And Herstory, Melanie and Laura Murphy of Herstory are featured in that as well. And it gives a beautiful overview of both the goddess and the saint. So that's on RTE Player. You can find that, Finding Brigid. I just actually had a chance to watch it last night. So really what it was about bringing the light of day and the new beginnings, and let's ground in at this. So we put together a petition in 2019, and we were kind of knocking on doors, putting it out there. There wasn't much take, and then 2020 hit, and we were calling for this to be made a national holiday in 2020, not knowing what was coming. And it was like, it was totally meant to happen that way, because not mentioning what happened in 2020, we all know what happened in 2020. We were all asked nearly to come home to ourselves, to stop how we'd been living in a way, and to review and to look at what's meaningful in our world. What road are we going down? Are we becoming really disconnected from life, from ourselves, from each other? And Brigid, for me, asks us to reconnect, to build bridges. It's in her name, whether you look at the goddess Brigid or whether you look at the Saint Brigid. She's building a bridge also between our pagan faith and our Christian faith. She carries the same qualities, regardless, through all faiths. She bridges the gap between winter and spring, between the darkness and the light. And for me, one of the most important things that we can do in these times for humanity is to build the bridges between our cultures, and to build the bridges between ourselves, to come to a more compassionate understanding of how we can unite, how we can collaborate, how we can lift each other up rather than tearing each other down. I feel that was a big part of where we were potentially going wrong in humanity. So this was also an opportunity for us to go, okay, this makes sense. And particularly because of the amount of isolation that people were experiencing in COVID and the lockdown as well. So over that 2-year period, it gained more and more momentum, and people had time to stop and think and reflect about it. And then Laura Murphy, who's a poet in residence with Herstory, is a survivor. Her mother was a survivor of the mother and baby homes. So this was very close to her heart. And there was a letter of apology written by the Taoiseach at the time. This all started to emerge again, this whole issue of women and the mistreating of women in that dark period, coming out of that darkness again. Laura wrote an open letter to the Taoiseach asking him where he I won't go into it in too much detail, but she wrote an open letter asking the Taoiseach to acknowledge, the apology for the state on this issue that had come to light, and called for him to really ground in that public holiday, even though the petition had already started, and it went viral. Imelda May, the artist and singer, put it out as well. There was a whole, and the Department of Foreign Affairs also. There were so many senators, there were so many politicians who then just sparked the idea. It was like, yes, this makes sense. This makes sense. And it does make sense. So Brigid, in a way, was igniting the fire, so to speak, in everybody going, yes, we need this to happen now. And it did. And it was such an amazing victory in terms of recognizing, yes, our matron, our female, our patron saint, and all that she embodies. And for me, as I said, it's the qualities of what she embodies, of how we can take those qualities into our lives today and embrace them and live them with each other. I'm going to share, and then, yeah, totally welcome any questions that you have. I'd love to share a couple of slides just in terms of images of what we have done in Herstory, particularly around Brigid and illuminating artworks. It's we're calling on the education of children as well to recognize the important role of women in history, so that going forward, it's a more balanced view. in hand with the important role that our men hold as well. So bear with me while I just share the screen here, and let me just make this bigger as well for you. So I don't know if you're aware, but apparently there was a comet that was passing over that hadn't been seen in 50,000 years, and it passed over on Brigid's Day, and it was a green comet. If you Google it, you'll see it's everywhere in the news. And it was like, she's coming in with a bang here. She's really shining her light on not just women, and particularly for Ireland, but as you all know, Ireland holds such a strong place in the world. St. Patrick's Day, he'd already lit the way, so to speak. There are varying numbers, but the one that's most common to me is 80 million Irish descendants and diaspora around the world. There's only 5 million of us here. And Irish, I mean, being born here, living here, that has become, for me, if you're Irish, you connect in with the heart of who we are in Ireland, and the hospitality that we hold. And going around the world, we are the most welcomed nation and the most illuminated on St. Patrick's Day. So he already lit up the world on St. Patrick's Day. And that's what we thought when Melanie started to do the illuminations around Brigid's Day. Let's light up Brigid. Let's bring that to light. So we had already started this before the petition was launched, and the idea behind Herstory, bringing the heroines of Ireland in particular, and it will probably go global in another form, but bringing them from the shadows to the light, illuminating artworks on beautiful buildings, bringing a sense of awe and wonder to the sense of curiosity, imagination. Some beautiful artworks that were projected on buildings, and to see them in person and to have the stories told and to have the music playing is quite spectacular. It really makes a stand. So here's a artwork by a guy called Sean. Brigid in all her glory as a bishop, she was a bishop as well, projected onto the cathedral in Kildare, which is so powerful. So we were making a stand, and we were really shining that light. And to be there in person is a very special thing as well. There's a very energetic presence to lighting up the GPO with Brigid. It was really special. And Jim Fitzpatrick, who's a famous artist here in Ireland as well, who's well known for his portrait, his iconic icon of Che Guevara, did a special portrait of Brigid for us as well. And that's there, the cathedral in Kildare as well. So I want to share with you as well, just how it went viral, and it just took off. As you know, when things go viral, that you know that you're on to a winner. It's just, there's a certain amount of time that it takes to get it going, and then it just happens. So I want to stop sharing here for a moment, and I want to just quickly share, if we have time, a poem that Laura Murphy, the poet in residence of Herstory that I mentioned, you saw a photograph of her there holding the flame, which is here behind me, and the Brigid's cross. She was inspired to write a poem about Brigid called Ismisha Brigid, and we put it to music by there's a beautiful chant behind it by a beautiful woman who's from Fahart, who lives near Fahart, up where Brigid was born, called Anne MacDonald. And the chant is called A Calling Home. So Laura was inspired to write a poem in Ismisha Brigid that just came through her. And this was the ancient way. Saint Brigid is also patron saint of poets. So the goddess Brigid was very associated with poetry as well, and the flow of inspiration that just comes from that illuminated place. And so I want to share, if that's okay, I want to share Laura's poem. It is on YouTube. Just bear with me now. Here we go. And make sure the sound is working. I'm going to make it full screen. Can you all see the screen okay before I press play? Somebody could just unmute and say yes, and we'll go ahead.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, great. Enjoy.
I am of the sky. I am of the earth, dreaming in truth since the day of my birth. Is misha an Allah sa spare, is misha an nahar fuin talav, is misha an solas o nialach, is misha niart na darach. Tugam on balak na bofina, tugam balak na farina. I am the light of 1,000 stars shining over Kildara fair. I am the fire of her sacred heart, imbus flame reviving Nyart. I am the water of her waters that bear fruits of the womb, alchemical air. I am the first drop of morning dew, fires of the mountain igniting anew. I am the blessing of a bright new dawn, love from on high, the exalted one. Is solas orga me ag dera an torca, is there manal a hagan on va. I am the cloak that stretches horizons, a reminder to all that miracles happen. Dia gwich, dia is muirgwich, dia is muirgwich is podrig. Dia is muirgwich is podrig agus breed. Who was born by the light of the rising sun? By whose light did Oam dawn? Who is the bridge between heart, hearth, and home? Who inspires the words of the poet? Who ignites the driacht of the druid? Who fuels the strength of the warrior? Is misha on Bonry and Black? Is misha on Blaheen Bio? Is misha Bail on Illa ag Lunru Gajo? I am the voice of mother tongue, sound of her heart calling you home. I am the sweet nectar of mother's love, tenderness of her hands' healing touch. I am the gentle light that guides you, the fiery arrow that carries you, the blazing fire that fuels you. I am she who is goddess. I am she who is saint. I am she who is strength. I am she. I am she. I am she. Is Misha Breed.
Nope. So you'll get a sense of, let me just stop the YouTube in the background here. You'll get a sense of the power that comes by Brigid's hand and the magic that can happen as well in dropping into that place of heart and creativity and embracing the feminine qualities, and not just for women but for men as well. We all have those qualities of nurturing, of collaboration, of doing things a different way. So yeah, thank you so much for having me here today, and I look forward to the other speakers. Does anybody have any questions?
Thanks, Tracy. Really appreciate that. That was a fantastic presentation. That was a
Thanks,
very
Laura.
nice piece at the end. Nice and relaxing to listen to. And the comet, yeah, that's interesting. I was trying to see that comet the other night, but it was too cloudy. But I didn't make the connection with Brigid.
Yeah.
We have a good few questions in for you.
Great.
So I suppose first of all, so what century was the goddess Brigid? Or, sorry, yeah, the goddess Brigid. Does she make the way for the Saint Brigid?
It's interesting. I mean, especially when you're talking about myth and legend and the goddess, and it's such a long period of time before anything was written. It's hard to identify for real anything really from myth and legend. What is truth? For me, I think the myths and the legends offer us insight into how we take the meaning for today. But coming back to the question, the timeline for the goddess Brigid, alongside, as Alva said, I know she's had to leave, the Tuatha De Danann were the magical, mystical race of beings who ruled Ireland, said to be 5,000 years ago. And she's said to be the daughter of the Dagda, who was the good god, the god that brought the cauldron of plenty. And the daughter of Boan, who was the river goddess for the River Boyne, associated with the Milky Way, also associated with the Ganges in India. So like there's so many different correlations. We could go well down a deep well of exploration on that question alone. But I think her qualities carried over. And in that documentary on RTE called Finding Brigid, there is a correlation between the goddess and the saint and what actually happened in the transfer at that time. So given the interest of time, I'd encourage you to watch that documentary to find out a little bit more about that rather than going into it in more detail, if that's okay.
Thanks, Tracy. Oh, sorry, were you finished?
Yes, yeah. I was just looking at the questions.
Questions, yeah. We can put in a link to the documentary as well. On the RTE player.
It is.
Yeah, so I mean that kind of ties into the next question around how did Brigid make it, as a woman at the time, and was society already recognizing the potential of women, or does she have some special qualities? You mentioned she already had, I suppose, connections, and that she with the Tuatha De Danann, so was that partly why?
Yes, and also I think the Saint Brigid came from a good background, so she had a really good standing in Ireland at the time. Her father was quite influential, and she came and founded a monastery in Kildare. And it was interesting because the monastery, she was an abbess. She was given the title of abbess and hence a bishop, but she also invited an abbot into her monastery as well. So it was really interesting in terms of equality but the abbot at the time answered to Brigid rather than the other way around, which was really interesting for like 5th century or 6th century. 5th century. So she was ahead of her time in that regard. And I think it was probably because of how she carried herself and the qualities of compassion, of healing that she brought automatically overcomes anything else political, it just melts anything that tries to overshadow that. And I think that's one of the qualities that we really need to bring forth in ourselves today as well. So yeah.
Brilliant, thanks. And I think a couple of the next questions are kind of tied together. So
Great.
a lot of people saying thank you and how amazing it was. And people are wondering, how do you celebrate the day itself, and how can you be a reflection? How can you reflect it?
Great question.
Great
question. Actually, we've on the Herstory website, herstory.ie, there's a whole section dedicated to Brigid, and there's also, we set up a website, brigidsday.org, where we have put up examples of how you can celebrate yourself. I've written a ceremonial piece where you can actually go to your local Brigid's well. There are hundreds of them around the country where you can bring a simple ritual yourself. And I think it doesn't have to be on Brigid's Day. And because the bank holiday is made the first Monday of the month is the 6th, I think just invoking the energy of Brigid in herself will bring us to a sense of really, that lands in you, where you can light a tea light or a little candle and just say your own invocation of prayer. There are so many festivals popping up all over the place now already. So there's, just Google Brigid these days and you'll find, I know the Department of Foreign Affairs have also a wonderful website as well on their website about initiatives that are happening all over the country. Also next year, 2024, is going to be a huge celebration around Brigid because it's the 1500th year since her death. So this is just the beginning. So yeah, check out all of the websites as well, and Google it and call her into your own nature. Yeah.
Thanks, Tracy. And we're putting some links into the chat there if people want to check them out.
Thank
so just
you.
Another question might be tied in. So just, today so many things are constantly disconnecting us from family and friends and our own culture. So how can we use Brigid's Day to remind us of the importance of family, friendship, and keeping us together? So
I'd love to put that question back to the person who asked it. I think you probably know the answer already. I think calling on the qualities, getting to know, actually doing some research and getting to know who Brigid is for you. As Siobhan McSweeney in the documentary on RTE said, that the more she tried to find Brigid, the more she tried to understand who she was, the more she understood that actually Brigid is a reflection of all of those who spoke about her. She's a mirror. So in doing the research around Brigid, whether the saint or the goddess, and tapping into the qualities of what resonates for each of you individually, what qualities would you like to embody? What qualities would you like to bring into your own life, into your family, your friends? And start putting that into practice. Start playing around with that and inviting that into your own life. That's what I'd suggest. Yeah, I think that answers your question.
Excellent, thank you. And just another question then was around, is it celebrated in 32 counties, and do they have lights in other counties as well?
Interesting. So the Herstory light show, obviously Herstory needs to be funded because it takes quite a lot to put on the light shows, and the different county councils have been amazing in funding and supporting the light shows. So it has been in Roscommon, Galway, Dublin City Council were putting on their own light show this year. So it's kind of like spreading like Brigid's cloak beyond Herstory as well. We're bringing it also, the Department of Foreign Affairs bringing it to the embassies in different countries around the world too. So 32 counties not yet in terms of the holiday. And actually, I just received a request from somebody based in the north to say, can you help us? We want to start a petition to make it a holiday up the north as well. So I'm sure that'll happen in time, given that, you know, again, she bridges that north-south divide as well. Yeah, there's plenty of ways. Thanks for that question as well about other ways to popularize the event in Ireland and other cultures. I mean, like, I think that'll happen naturally. I think it'll unfold in its own way, because it's just, Brigid is inspiring people to actually just take action. Actually, her skull is in Lisbon. It was taken there for safekeeping in, I think it was the 12th century. And so there's connection. Brigid has connections in every country nearly around the world. So I think it'll just happen anyway. And if you're inspired to do something about it, then yeah, please reach out. Yeah. So I'm conscious of time as well.
Thank you so much,
everybody, for your
Tracy.
questions. Thank you.
Thanks. It was
Thanks for
fantastic
having
listening
me.
to you. That was
Thanks so much.
brilliant presentation, and we'll have to be looking up that. Didn't know her skull was in Lisbon. That's a
Yeah,
fact.
yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. And we will
Thanks,
we'll be following it online and do more research, I'm sure.
yeah. Thanks.
Okay, so we will move on to the next section of the webinar. So we have 3 more fantastic speakers, and you would have seen on ICOS's social media over the last while, we've been highlighting heroines that you have identified from your home countries that maybe have similar significance to St. Brigid in your home country. So you can check out ICOS's social media, our Instagram and Twitter. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn if you want to follow us, and read up on some of those stories as well. So our next speaker is Jessica Mandana. So Jessica is an advocacy communication specialist with over 5 years experience in development communications. Her experience includes strategic communications and campaigning, digital media management, advocacy marketing, content creation for advocacy and activism. Her areas of expertise include sexual and reproductive health and rights, economic justice and rights, and gender equality. And she's a published writer and one of the recipients of the 2022 International Conference for Family Planning Youth Trailblazer Award. So she has a bachelor's degree in journalism and mass communication and a postgrad diploma in international gender studies. And she's currently studying for her master's degree in public advocacy and activism in the University of Galway. So Jessica has a presentation for us on finding your voice in activism. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Jessica.
Thank you. I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Okay. I think we can see that. So once again, thank you, Laura, and thank you for creating the platform where we can share. So my Herstory, my heroine is Dr. Tlaleng Mufokeng from South Africa. And Dr. T is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the rights of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. Specifically, what she does that inspired me the most for her to be my heroine is she's also a medical doctor who uses her qualifications as a doctor to be a safe abortion provider and an activist. And she has dedicated her career and her skills, her qualifications to advocate for women's rights, which is how she got to become the Special Rapporteur on the rights of everybody to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health. So just a little bit of background. I met Dr. T a few years ago after the onset of COVID. So everything was virtual and we were not able to meet in person. So we met via Zoom, we met via Instagram lives and Twitter lives at the time, Twitter spaces, and just having conversations around issues of bodily autonomy. At the time in Malawi, we were strongly advocating for access to safe abortion. And she is one of the most vocal African women who are speaking on the issue and who had been advocating for the issue. So initially, interacting with her was about learning and understanding how best to do that. And it was such I think one of the greatest moments of my professional career was when I finally got to meet her last year, where she was the chairperson for ICFP, which I was attending. And one of the first things that she said to me after I'd explained to her, who I was and how we'd met before, and that this was the first time we're meeting in person. And this was at an airport where I was explaining to her. And one of the first things that she said to me was that, some things are meant to happen. And me being a spiritual person and me believing in my ancestry, I also believe that everything that I put out in terms of manifestations for my career goals is something that is very spiritually driven in what I believe in my spirituality and my ancestry. And she reaffirmed that to say that finally meeting her in person was something that was meant to happen. And from that moment that we first met in person, finally, she has been a voice of reason and has been a voice of guidance. And she's been a mentor, but she's also been a supporter, where we've had moments where we laugh. But she's also been very supportive in terms of what my goals are. I call Dr. T Kaitedi, which is a Sotho word for big sister. Because she is from the Sotho tribe. And she also, one of the funniest things that she did was that she felt very familiar with me, that she was speaking to me in Sotho with the assumption that I would understand what she was saying. In some way, I did understand what she was saying, even though I am not South African or from the Sotho tribe. But it was something that just felt like it was meant to be. And that is a very big thing for my spirituality and what I believe in. And as I was, getting to know her and having conversations with her, she always reminded me that when you're a young woman or you're a young activist, there's so much that is happening within the advocacy and activism space. Sometimes you kind of tend to lose yourself in the moment. It becomes hard. There's a lot of backlash that you will face individually or as a collective, because what we're advocating for is going against very ancient systems of oppression. And those systems do fight back sometimes. It becomes draining and it becomes stressful. And sometimes we tend to lose ourselves. Sometimes all of the challenges and all of the barriers start to silence you, be it just mentally and sometimes physically. We've seen activists being arrested in parts of Africa. So it becomes a challenge to be within the advocacy and activism space, especially if you're young, still trying to build your network. It becomes very difficult. But she reminded me that it is important to always stand up for yourself. No matter what is happening to you, it is important to always take a step back to heal and take care of yourself, to make sure that you are good enough and strong enough to go back out there and to advocate even better, which is something that as young advocates and young activists, we're never really told and we're never really reminded to do, because we're always encouraged to always work and always be active, but sometimes you need to take a step back to take care of yourself. And part of taking care of yourself is also taking time to spend with friends and family to remind yourself that you are human. She is also one of the people who was very down to earth and just very human. She is one of the most well recognized and respected women when it comes to advocacy and activism globally, and she has achieved so much. But she's it was surprising for me to see how human she just can be. In moments where she will just laugh and will, after you laugh, she will be very sympathetic and empathetic towards whatever it is you're going through. And she is still able to give constructive advice. And that is advice that I carry with me every day. I think if I was to share everything that she has shared with me, it would take a very long time. But that is essentially why I chose her as my heroine. Because much like St. Brigid, she represents that resilience and that strength. And she also represents healing, because that is something that she values a lot in terms of just being an activist and fighting for women's rights. She values healing. She values taking time to make sure you're okay in order for you to be able to help others to be okay as well. And, she is a warrior who fights for women's rights, using all of her skills and her capacity and her platforms across the board. She does fight for women's rights. And it's something that she's deeply passionate about. And that is something that I am passionate about as well. And I aspire to learn from her and to just grow and be better, essentially, and meet my goals. And the fact that she's also in support of that is inspiring to me. And that's why she reminds me, or she speaks to me in similarity to St. Brigid. Thank you. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. That's fantastic listening to you, and we'll all have to check out Dr. Slaling Mofokeng as well, and it was really informative hearing that. So our next speaker, and we'll have questions at the very end for these three speakers. So our next speaker is Mombedo Nadine Joa. Mombedo is a lawyer, feminist educator, and USA public service scholar with years of experience as a gender advocate. Mombedo believes that everyone should have the right to a life free from violence, and where men and women, boys and girls enjoy equal rights and opportunities and have a say in the decisions that affect them. She has a bachelor's degree in political science with a minor in sociology. She's a graduate of the Louis Arthur Grimes School of Law, a former House of Representative aspirant, and the current president of the Network of Peace and Security Women in ECOWAS countries. So she's currently studying a Master's of Law at Maynooth University as an Ireland Fellow, and Mombedo is going to speak to us about Justice Gloria Musu Scott, a symbol of equality and justice in Liberia. So I'll pass over to you now. We can't hear you. Are you on mute? You're on mute.
Yeah. Thank
Right.
you. I will share my screen now. Okay. All right, so today I will share with you about Councillor Gloria Musu Scott. She's former Chief Justice of Liberia. She's a constitutional lawyer and gender equality advocate. Her legacy, she is still alive actually, and she's known for championing the rights of women, honor customary marriage and gender equality in Liberia. And her opinions when she was Chief Justice, preserving the independence of the judiciary and commitment to the rule of law during a dismal period in Liberian history during the period of 1997 to 2003. I think we all can remember that was the time Liberia was in the middle of a civil war, but they had also elected Charles Taylor as president in 1997, and Chief Justice Gloria Scott was elected as Chief Justice of the Liberia Supreme Court. So that was the time. So I just highlight the similarities between Brigid and Councillor Scott. Both of them are champions of equality and advocates. And like I said, Chief Justice Gloria Scott, when she went to school, she was reared by a single mother, and because of the struggles of her mother admonished her to go to school, be serious so that she would not end up like her, according to her. And so she decided to go to school, and she worked while she was going to school and she attended CWA, and then worked at public work while she was attending the University of Liberia. And then she attended a law school in the night, and she graduated. Her first case, her first job was prosecutor. She served as prosecutor in Bomi County. And her first case was a gang rape case, and she won that particular case. She had other roles until 1994, when she was appointed to be probate court judge. The probate court is where they decide issues of the estate, wills and estate, basically when you die or you want to do your deed. So she was at the probate court, and she observed that a lot of widows were discriminated against. So she organized the Association of Female Lawyers and to champion the cause of women and correct laws that promoted historical biases against women. So in 1998, the laws on the equal rights of women in customary marriages was passed. And because of her experience, she played very highly into the passage of that particular law. Both women are courageous and as known as protectors. Liberia was just from a civil war, and the chaos wasn't easy. Everyone felt that they were ruler. No one wanted to respect the rule of law, not less a magistrate. So there are two cases that are highlighted in Ritokpa and Iriflomo, where Justice Scott swas onto that means she on her own took that case after, she a letter was written to the Supreme Court, and she brought them before the court and punished them. And even though the punishment was little, but it was important. The symbolism of that was very important to preserving the independence and the integrity of the judiciary. It was also during that time that she wrote the opinion on Dejan, Barclay versus Dejan, which states that, a woman can own property in her own name, and having her husband is just a matter of style. And so she was very courageous at that time, because if Taylor had just known her as a threat, she would have died, because people were dying all around the place for just standing up at the time. So when we look back now at the opinions that she wrote at that time, we are amazed that she has such brevity, to do what she did. Both women are, they are compassionate. She's like a mother, but when there's a need to stand firm, she writes her opinion every time, and she makes her voice heard in the media. Both have used their power in their voice to motivate others. You can see the stories that have been told of Brigid today. That is how Justice Scott is. She has her own radio show called Gender in the Law, and our own Liberian English is called Colloquia, that we speak in Liberia. Justice Scott speaks Colloquia every Tuesday evening on ECOWAS radio, talking about women, rights to customary marriages, and just, creating awareness over the local, radio station. And they use their power to motivate. If you see the picture there, that was when Justice Scott defended Senator Boto Kane in the Supreme Court. Right in the corner there is me, and we're very happy. It was after the Supreme Court ruling that, Senator Boto Kane could take her seat. And that is one of the iconic cases that Justice Scott has taken part in. So, she's a protector of women, she's courageous. But one of the things I would like to say is the institution that she started, AFL, the Association of Female Lawyers, is one of the biggest organizations today in Liberia that is championing the rights of women and correcting policies in Liberia. And also, she is still in the vanguard of protecting women. So she brings that fierceness that is a leader, and the empathetic side of being a woman in leadership today. And that's what makes me inspired of her. And I decided to study law And maybe, just maybe, I will become a Chief Justice like her. So that is all. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Mambedo. That was really, really interesting. Really great presentation. Thank you so much. So we will move on now to our final speaker. So last but not least is David Chisanga. So David is a multi-award-winning journalist, broadcaster, filmmaker, researcher, lecturer, and communications specialist from Zambia's capital, Lusaka. He's currently pursuing a Master's of Arts in Media Studies at Mary Immaculate College in Limerick, where he also serves on the Students' Union as postgraduate officer as well. And David is going to talk to us about Linchena, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, an unsung heroine of Zambia. So I'll pass over to you now, David, and we will have some questions for the three speakers at the end. So if people want to start putting those into the chat, that would be great.
Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you very much to all the speakers that have already gone before me. You know, it's just a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited to just share something about Lenshina. You tried there, Laura. You actually tried to pronounce it very, very well. Let me just try to share my screen as well in this presentation. And as I'm sharing my screen, you know, I remember when I was trying to prepare for it, you know, one of my colleagues told me, David, what do you want to share about? You know, you want to share about a heroine from Zambia. Is it gonna be Lenshina? I'm like, oh, you're right. So definitely Lenshina, an unsung heroine of Zambia. That's what I'll be sharing about. Now, Alice Lenshina Mulenga, these were our names actually, Alice Lenshina Mulenga. Now, she was born in the 1920s in Kinsale district of then Northern Province, which is now Muchinga Province of Zambia. Now, she was the founder and leader of Lumpa Church, a church which strongly opposed polygamy as well as sorcery. So she was really a leader in a church as well as a founder of a church, the Lumpa Church. Now, her name is actually Lenshina, which is in Bemba. Bemba is one of the tribes in Zambia. Now Lenshina is just Regina, which means queen in a sense, because she was actually a leader. This was her after she became Christian and born again, or so to say, you know, the name changed to Regina from, you know, which is now Lenshina. Now her story in our country is mainly in the folk tales. You know, it's mainly in the folk tales back in historical stories as well. And primarily in as much as she existed in reality, you find her story in the folk tales. I remember Mom just also sharing her story back then in the days and just, you know, teasing me around here and there about, you know, coming from the Lenshina lineage. Now, why did I choose to talk about Lenshina really? You know, why does she matter to me personally and generally as well? Now, she was brave. You know, she went on to find a church, you know, which to become a leader. And I believe most people who've started something in life, they know that you have to be brave, just like, you know, just like St. Brigid. And I should also demonstrated from an early urge, you know, from an early time in Zambia that women could actually become leaders. In this case, you know, she was actually a religious leader. Now her church, which is Lumpa Church, is primarily known back in the days, you know, as having clashed with the government, you know, the government there in the Lumpa uprising. You know, she's actually well known for that. I think in history, that's what most people might actually find. Now, what I found very interesting from this so-called uprising is that, you know, she came out turning herself in and said, you know what, you're gonna stop this fight between the government, you're gonna stop the fight between the church and the government. You know, she came out, turn herself in. For me, this was a sign of, you know, self-sacrifice. You know, she gave up herself and said, you know what, let me be this sacrificial lamb, which I would say actually is a rare quality, you know, for a leader in itself. So above all, Lenshina championed women empowerment through her church. You know, it was at a time when male dominance was the norm. was at its height in the 1950s, 60s, around that time. And then she championed women empowerment in her church. Now, let me just also some of the connections between Latina as well as Saint Brig. Now, in as much as I wouldn't say Latina is really, a saint like Brigid of Ireland, but they have something really in common. The two of them pioneered women leadership in the church. Like I mentioned, a place where male dominance was actually the norm back then. They contributed immensely or contributed hugely to church growth in their communities. So it's about women empowerment back in the days. It's also about just bringing healing, like we've heard so much about Saint Brig. So for me, really, it means quite a lot. After looking at Brigid, after looking at the story as well, Lenshina's story, I come up with the conclusion that, when nobody, believes in you or your calling, continue believing in yourself and in your God, and more so, continue answering your call. Then and only then will you impact society. This is my conclusion from these stories, these experiences that I've been reading about and learning from these women. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. And thanks to all our speakers. We don't have any questions in the chat, so I'd encourage anyone to ask any questions if they have them now, particularly for our last three speakers. Or perhaps you'd like to share something with us today, maybe from somebody else that inspires you from your home country. If anyone wants to write into the chat box, give you a minute or two.
I'd love to put a question back to everybody else and ask, what are you going to do with all this information? How are you going to bring it into your own lives? I loved hearing the stories of the other presenters as well, and the connections. Yeah. It's always great to be in a webinar, isn't it, for an hour, and then, well, what do you do with it afterwards? Do you just forget about it and go back to, what you've been doing anyway? Yeah, maybe you'd like to share in the chat.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to share what they're gonna do as a follow-up from this, I know certainly I'll be doing a bit more reading on the information shared today. Let's see. No, I don't think. Someone said thank you, David.
I think, Laura, I can say something. When I was actually researching, I found there were just like few things about Lenshina. I think it's a common thing, where women heroine are put obviously at the back, not celebrated, so to say. Well, after all this and after doing much of my research, well, I would pledge to do something like a film of some sort, and try to tie into Brigid as well. I think, yeah, looking at my media and work, a film would do, at the end of the day. Not now, maybe later, but yeah.
Brilliant. I think we'd all definitely be watching that film. Tinoda, I think you had your hand up. I think you're able to speak if you would like to. I think you had a question. There you are.
No, not anymore. Not anymore. Actually, there was a technical error here. Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem
Yeah.
at all. Okay. Well, oh, I see. Hold on. No, I think everybody's gone a bit quiet. There's certainly been a lot of food for thought there. There are questions. Oh yes, there are questions. We have questions now. Okay. So someone has a question for David. I would like to know if your heroine is considered a heroine in your home country.
All right, so it's really, I would say it's really tricky considered as a heroine in my own country. I think it is more personal to me, really. Yeah.
More personal to you. Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. And just another kind of observation, one takeaway for me is I need to find a woman hero. Unfortunately, from the presented, I started to think which woman inspires me other than my mom. Therefore, I need to read more to find inspirational women from South Africa. So that was somebody, anonymous attendee who's South African. So that's, I'm sure there'll be plenty of heroines you'll be able to find from South Africa. Yes, we don't have any more questions or comments right now, so we might finish up if there's not any burning questions. We're just on time, exactly on time, which is great. Okay, well, I guess just from me, I just want to say thanks to all the speakers and all the attendees. I think we had nearly 80 people on the webinar at one point. So it's been really great attendance and interest, and certainly I've learned a lot. And I just want to thank the ICOS team as well. Obviously, want to thank DFA and Liz and the department for all the support in putting this together, and thank Tiana Monaki for organizing the event today. So yeah, I mean, happy Friday, everyone. And I hope people get to enjoy the bank holiday on Monday. Be thinking of Brigid at the same time. But yeah, we'll definitely stay in touch in relation to this topic, and I'm sure people can share links with one another as well. So I might leave it at that unless there was anything else. I think that's everything from us. And I say this is recorded too, so we can share it with you, and you can tell your friends as well about it. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you all have a great weekend.
And thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
And Tayana.
Thank you.
And
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.